Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm with over 20 years of experience.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, or LTIF. It's focused on grocery-anchored retail real estate. These are the kinds of properties that some investors believe remain essential even in uncertain markets. People still need to buy food. That's what they say makes this sector more resilient and more stable over the long term.
Unlike many alternative investment funds that are only available to professionals, Greenman Open is open to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investments and a highly regulated structure.
Just remember, all investments carry risk. Values can go up or down, and past performance isn't a reliable guide to future returns. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but you should always speak to a financial advisor before investing. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Hello and welcome to this, our latest edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
And just to remind you that the subscription edition now comes out a day earlier, that if you want a double dose of Ivan and myself at the weekends, and yes, you're probably saying we're doses, all right, you can get it on a Sunday morning now if you're subscribing at the bargain price of €6 a month, which is actually 5 cents cheaper than the average price of a pint of Guinness, as I was reading about this week. Ivan, it hasn't been the most exciting of weeks politically, but there are lots of things that I want to talk to you about. One of which is the HSE at 20 years of age, because Bernard Gloucester, the chief executive, is stepping down in a year's time. Well, a little less than a year. He's giving plenty of notice. He's stepping down even though he is only going to be reaching the age of 60 at that stage, heading into early retirement. And a very good story on the front page of the Irish Daily Mail today by Sarah McGuinness, saying that he's going to walk away with a €562,000 pension lump sum and annual payments in retirement of almost €190,000. What do you make of that?
Well, I thought the most significant part of the story, first of all, and it's slightly unexplained why he is leaving, because it's premature. He signed a contract for 5 years. He's leaving in March of next year.
Which will be just over halfway through the contract?
A little bit more. I think he's about 2 years, 3 months into it at the moment.
He won't be there to see the opening of the National Children's Hospital. That said, if he stayed for the full 5-year contract, he mightn't have been there for its opening either.
His successor mightn't be around for the opening of the Children's Hospital.
It's not something we should really be laughing at, is it?
No. So, first of all, what I found interesting about it is that the HSE actually has celebrated its 20th birthday. It was set up by Mary Harney in 2005. And so therefore, I think it's reasonable to say, how did it get on, or how is it going? Because my big break in politics was that I was trying for 10 years to get on the front bench as a government backbencher. Alan Dukes was leader, and out of a clear blue sky, he did a complete reshuffle in 1988 and he made me health spokesperson. This was at a time when Rory O'Hanlon, Dr. Death, was doing massive cuts, McSharry period in the late 80s, things that weren't done in the Fitzgerald Spring government, and it was slash and burn. There was 2 hospitals in my local area being closed and so on. And so therefore we had the Tallaght strategy.
And just to remind people, the Tallaght strategy from back there was, it was a minority government that Fianna Fáil was operating, but Alan Dukes, in the national interest, if not necessarily Fine Gael's best interests, decided that there wouldn't be a vote to bring down the government, that it would be given time to try and do some of the things that had to be done.
So therefore the policy perspective of what I was pursuing was, I couldn't say we'll spend more money. Right? So anyway, Bernard Allen had been my predecessor in the position, and we advanced this into the actual election, which was to set up a board sláinte. There were 6, and I think became 8 regional health boards, and the argument was that everything from the purchase of vaccines, medicines, pharma products, even cotton wool, eggs, everything that the health service need, that it was a flight to scale. That if there was one single purchasing agency, you'd be able to sweat better discounts, better value. Secondly, that you would avoid in terms like HR, repeat administrative systems. So you could have one national HR system, payroll system and so on, which again could drive productivity and efficiencies. I have to say that in the year which they've announced putting back in place regions as part of Sláintecare, the biggest part of it, that I have been bitterly disappointed in such a small country that the centralised system hasn't worked. So I would say, first of all, Bernard Gloucester is a big failing. Like Paul Reid's time was defined by COVID and the pandemic, which is sort of reacting to circumstances. But he did drive a lot of technological change, and he let rip on things that might never have been accelerated otherwise. If I was running the health service, I wouldn't have 50 priorities, and you can have priorities to do with oncology, priorities to do with maternity care, paediatrics and so on. I would say two things I'm going to do. I'm going to ensure that you have electronic health records because that saves so much time in diagnostics and not repeating tests, and it also eliminates paper from the system. It costs about 2 billion, it needs to be done. And the second thing I would do for all inpatient and hospital services, I would introduce a basic 7-day week, because therefore all your assets, your beds, your x-ray equipment, you're sweating better productivity out of those. And I have to say that the HSE has become part of the problem. We both do a lot of health-related conferences, and the layers upon layers of people in St. Stephen's Hall or wherever it is, the head office.
Just up by Houston Station.
Like, it is just turned into a Tower of Babel. That even to get the one hand to know what the other hand is doing between community care and outpatient services, and the answer to everything is just more staff, another 10,000 staff and so on. And like, actually, that is not going to be sustainable going forward.
Just a few things on the back of that. I remember back in 2007 interviewing Bertie Ahern as Taoiseach going into the election. And it was one of these, I've forgotten most of the things that I've done, but certain interviews actually do sort of stick in the memory. And I do remember presenting him with a document in relation to the establishment of the HSE, that when all of the various divisions were amalgamated, there were at that stage only, I think it was 8 people on level 8, the highest level, highest paid level. And normally when you have a rationalisation, you'd get rid of it, you save money. There was actually an explosion of those numbers. This was the deal that Bertie Ahern did with the trade unions. And I remember he just started looking away from me, didn't want to look at the document that I had in my hand in relation to it. But I remember thinking at the time that if that had been, and okay, look, we're not talking about private company, private business or whatever, because running a health system is different, albeit, and we'll get to this in a little while when we get talk about new hospitals. It's amazing how quickly private hospitals get built by comparison with public hospitals. But we actually expanded it. And you could say, well, we needed to expand because there had been underinvestment previously and there were big waiting lists that needed to be addressed with, and you had to have staff to deal with it and all those sort of things. But we created more bureaucracy, it seems, rather than putting into place working systems to actually make sure that people got their treatment more speedily and more effectively. You've brought up two things there in relation to what you believe the priorities should be, and I think they're excellent points, well made. One is the electronic records digitisation. Again, I remember being at a conference, a MedTech conference back in 2015 or 2016, and the guy who'd been brought in from the UK to run it all showed exactly how using an iPad or using other electronic devices, how instead of having a paper-based system, you would be able to, for the benefit of the health of the patients, as well as making it more easily administratively, you could keep everything so that if, say, for example, your records maybe are with your doctor down in Wexford, if, God forbid, you were to fall ill in Dublin and had to go to a hospital in Dublin, that they wouldn't have to be phoning up Wexford to get your information so that they could more speedily see all the information on you. And that's actually a patient care issue as well as being an efficiency and effectiveness issue for the running of the hospitals. And the other thing then is the 7-day week. And that is something that Jennifer Carroll McNeill has been making a big issue of since she's become Minister for Health, for making sure that the new public-only consultant contracts for the doctors are honoured on a 7-day basis. And it seems that there is a struggle getting a lot of things. Now, it's not just the consultants not been available at the weekends. It's all of the other things that have to be open, the radiology labs, all the various things to make it a fully functional hospital over a 7-day week, all our hospitals. And that needs to be done. And why I'm surprised Gloucester is going now, and I don't know what reasons there are behind it, but I was getting the impression that Carol McNeill as Minister and Robert Watt as Secretary-General of the Department of Health were quite happy that Gloucester was actually trying to accelerate and develop those things, and felt that he was a bit more proactive perhaps than Paul Reid, who had been a good media performer but perhaps had not been as effective as they'd wanted, or as Jennifer Carroll McNeill's predecessor had wanted, in effecting change.
You see, and I think all that's very valid, and I think it's disappointing he's going. Bernard first came on my attention with TUSLA, and I honestly believe, like, TUSLA has responsibility for 90,000 problem kids who have no parents, actually problem parents rather than problem kids. Like, they are dealing with people who are before the juvenile justice system and so on. Really problematic things, people that don't want to go to school, people that are not motivated, and all the things that we would take for granted. And TUSLA has lots of problems. Grace, the report on Grace is only the tip of the iceberg, but that went back to HSE days. And so put it like this, he took over from a tough job, he was a safe pair of hands, and fine. Where, we'll just depersonalise it for a moment, where I think the HSE has lost its way, we'll take a couple of the current controversies. Right? So we take the controversy in relation to hospitals. Well, that's now the National Paediatric Development Board. And then we take the coils, springs in the...
Sorry, the first one you meant, is this the hip operation?
No, I'm actually talking the National Children's Hospital itself.
Oh, sorry,
is that
yes.
the responsibility of the HSE? The idea is we'd have one pyramid, we'd have vertical integration, and the person at the top, the CEO of the HSE, the buck would stop with them. What I'm saying is, like, nobody's saying all the problem with the National Children's Hospital is anything to do with the HSE. So we go on to children's healthcare, and we come on to the issue of the metal alloy springs that were used. We're looking at the 1,757 letters that went out for the dysplasia of people who may or may not. Amazingly, going back to 2015, like, it's not just a problem to 2021 to 2023, it seems to be much wider. So that's a clinical issue. Where's the HSE in the... Oh, no, that's...
So, but this is the hip operations for children.
Yes, yeah.
You know, and I think we should wait until next week to discuss that in more detail when we have the information.
I totally accept
There's
that.
an enormous amount of political speculation and grandstanding in advance of actually having information.
And it is a clinical matter. But what I'm trying to say is this. That's all about Children's Health Ireland, right? CHI. Yeah. And that those alloy springs and all of those issues, it's not the HSE. And then we have all these things. Oh, well, that's a matter for HICWA. What's actually happened is the HSE has spawned a whole, in the last 20 years, generation of other quangos other than the HSE. So what we've actually got in the health service is not better performance, better integration, better accountability. What we've got is a mountain of alibis in terms of blame game. Oh, well, that's CHI's responsibility.
And then there are things that the Department of Health has to be held accountable for. And Martin Wall in the Irish Times this week brought back up the issue of the National Maternity Hospital, which is something I think I'd mentioned to you in recent weeks, that it has struck me as where's the building work going on with this? So we have...
You are joking when you say that. Where's the building work? There is no building work.
Well, no, they built the hole.
Sorry.
They've cleared the site.
Okay.
So we're brilliant at actually...
They're looking into the hole. Okay,
well, exactly,
right.
Yeah. This is what we're brilliant at. And this goes back to what I've banged on about on a number of occasions about, for example, the Conference Convention Centre down in Cork. The site is cleared. The site is waiting. When will work actually start on it? It's the same out in St. Vincent's Hospital, out near RT in Dublin 4, where a site was identified. And do you remember, it's now nearly 4 years ago that we had these massive political rows as to who would actually own the land. Would it be the state, or would it be the nuns, or would the nuns continue to own it on a 300-year lease to the state at a peppercorn rate, which would effectively mean the state owned it? And there was this enormous kerfuffle, and it finally got sorted out after much controversy. But has that brought us any closer to actually getting the hospital built? No. A decision was, this has been going on 12 years now.
Yeah.
It was
May
back,
2013, yeah. James O'Reilly announced.
James O'Reilly,
you know
exactly.
what the figure was at the time?
150 million.
Yeah.
150 million was apparently going to be. And by the way, all 5 of my children were born in the National Maternity Hospital in Holles Street. So I know the corridors of it well from being in and out. I wonder, I hope my grandchildren, if there are any grandchildren, aren't going to be born in there, because that would be a sign of an enormous failing on the part of the state if we didn't have an alternative to it, because the building is no longer, they do brilliantly, the doctors and the nurses in there, in a falling down building. They need to be in a new building. But it's incredible to think that because of delay, and maybe it's because of all this, we need to go out and we need to go to tender and we need to get the best thing. We need to dot the I's and cross the T's, and we don't want to make any mistakes, because they have pissed around for so long in relation to it. The building now may cost, according to the report in the Irish Times, 1.5 billion. Not that far off the National Children's Hospital.
That's just the construction cost. The actual fit-out cost is another 500 million. That's the latest estimate.
So another National Children's Hospital. Although, okay, I know...
Sorry, can I just explain the difference there?
Yeah.
So with the National Children's Hospital, very soon, BAM will be handing it over, right, back to the board. They have to fit 36,000 pieces of clinical equipment. They have to put in the electronic health records, and 4,000 staff have got to exist. So those costs, once you've done the raw building, that is just at the beginning of it. But I have a question for you, because I was actually born in Holles Street, and I've nothing to disagree with what you say, but I would say this, that my daughter-in-law, who lives close to Castleknock, had a baby 3 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
And so I assumed, because it's the National Maternity Hospital and because they're living in Dublin and she had the baby in Dublin, they'd be there. And
but there are other hospitals.
No, the Rotunda.
There is the Rotunda, and they're also St. James's.
But I went to go visit her, and it was in the Rotunda.
You went to the wrong hospital.
No, I went to the right hospital. This actually isn't about me. The point is...
Something isn't about you, Ivan, right?
The point I'm trying to make to you is this. If you are going to spend 2 billion on a national maternity hospital, and you're going to continue with James's and the Rotunda, which my understanding is it's just a replacement for Holles Street. Like, what chronic bad value is that? In other words, if the whole point of the National Children's Hospital was you get Temple Street, you get Crumlin, you get Tala, all 3 paediatric units put into one, if this is just a replacement for Holles Street, it just seems farcically expensive.
It does seem extraordinary. I don't think
because Rotunda is a very old building.
Yeah,
that's what.
Exactly.
It's as antiquated, and the care there. It was actually like a New York bus station. It was just so busy. They had to restrict visitors one at a time. But it was actually like a junction where people were queuing to get in and get out, and so on. And it was antiquated. Is the point I'm making? The Rotunda.
Yeah.
So if you're designing a national maternity hospital, why wouldn't you try and upgrade the Rotunda facilities and their catchment area as well?
Well, I think you probably will actually have to do that. That'll happen, and it'll happen with James's as well. But it does strike me as extraordinary how the bill could actually go that much. A large part of it due to delay. But then you see excuses that it's more expensive to build because it's alongside an existing hospital. And I went, hang on a second. Hold on, that doesn't make sense, because on that area, on that site, in this century alone, St. Vincent's Private developed a big hospital right beside the public hospital. That didn't add, to my understanding, to the cost because it was beside it. You have enormous apartment blocks that were built in Ellen Park behind. So this idea that suddenly, that's going to make it more expensive. I mean, I smell a crock there, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's something going on. But, and then it comes to, somebody else was in touch with me on the last word during the week when we were talking about this. pointing out the Bon Secures are about to open a new hospital in Limerick. It's been built in the space of a couple of years. They've just got on with it. And this comes back to another hobby horse of mine, is these elective hospitals that were planned for Dublin, Galway and Cork.
It's in the programme for government, yeah.
Sorry, it was in the last programme for government. Well, sorry, these were announced back in 2021 and 2022. Big hullabaloo and the rest of it. And the idea is very good about making sure you get daycare hospitals, you do operations, you move people out, make the hospitals with the emergency departments have a bit of the stress taken off them. And we talk about things and we decide that they're going to be done and they are not done. And it is just absolutely extraordinary that we have not built those hospitals despite the fact that we have this extraordinary demand coming. But you know what? I think what we do is we might take a break and we come back and I
want to talk politics.
Yeah. Well, this is politics, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is, but I want to talk raw politics.
Oh, raw politics. Well, I also do want to talk about planning issues because some of the stuff we've been talking about in relation to Uisce Éireann is really starting to hit.
And I've another whopper of a housing scheme that was turned down, having been granted approval by Bord Pleanála in a place called Glentown. Do you know where it is in Cork?
East Cork,
yeah. So the situation is it was granted in May 22 and the wonderful people in the planning court have now said, no, we're not going ahead with this.
Yeah, and could those people be hit with vacant tax levy because of the fact that they actually haven't gotten on with building despite making the efforts to get the planning permission?
No point in having a housing czar if Richard Humphreys is going to decide what goes and what doesn't go.
That's from the judge, OK. All right, we'll be back with much more after this short break.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. The fund is managed in Ireland. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Now, before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments could go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back. Just before we get to the raw politics, as you call it, Ivan, which in other words means the gossip you've been picking up, let's talk a little bit, though, about, again, the issues in relation to not getting things built, because we mentioned about hospitals not getting built. And the thing we've been talking about, Ballybogan, where there's the potential for 6,000 homes in the north side of Dublin, close to Glasnevin Cemetery, but very close to public transport links, with the potential, very close 15-minute walk to the Lewis, the potential that you will, and also to rail services that are heading out to the west.
It's a perfect master planned strategic site that if this was in Brussels or Paris, they would just decide we're going to do this.
And it was first mooted 10 years ago. Now, there are certain issues, apparently. I was talking to Tom Phillips, who is a planning expert in this, and he says there are businesses still operating in the industrial estate who would have to be relocated. But you know what? They can be bought out like you do when you're building roads and things like that, compulsory purchase orders, and they can be relocated because there is a greater good as well as individual and corporate property rights. This was first mooted 10 years ago. They're talking about maybe getting 6,000 units built within the next 10 years.
What's the roadblock?
Water. This comes back to this thing again. The swimmer who was worried about the discharge from the Clonshaugh sewage treatment plant, the one swimmer who managed to get the judgment to block the new construction.
All about the correspondence between the EPA and the Bord Pleanála. It wasn't to say no, but they were to go back, and it's put it back 4 years.
So we're not serious about dealing with these issues.
So, I'll just give you the latest one. Like you could not make this.
This is Glantown, which is
Glantown. So Glantown,
not far from the city centre.
Well, I don't know where Glantown is because Cork. I either know nor
You're
care.
willfully neglectful. Apart from the time when you were sent down for the Cork North Central in 1995.
Apart from the 400 houses that we are building ourselves in
that's true.
Waterrock.
Oh, you do have a
I
vested interest.
I do care about that.
Where is that?
No,
where is that
that's in Newtown. Fantastic. It's like the Adamstown or Clonburris of Cork. It's got a new railway station. It's going to have 2,500 houses.
Where is
and
it?
It's called Waterrock. Just the Cork city side of Middleton. Now, so I now want to delve into this application by Rudden Homes, which was granted approval under the SHD proposal in May 22 by Onboard Planola. Happy days. And so this involved 72 houses and 40 apartments, a total of 112 residential units at a place called Ballynaroon at Glounthaune in Cork. So you can imagine now if that was granted in 22, this has actually been in concept design since about 2020, okay? And obviously there was a need for it in terms of that there was customers for this and so on. So anyway, what happened, this individual, Deirdre Condon, lodged an appeal to the High Court. And basically,
as she is legally entitled to do,
absolutely.
shall we say that there's nothing legally wrong with what she has done, shall we just get that, right?
But no, where I part ways with you is that we are allegedly in the middle of a housing crisis, nay, emergency. And Justice Richard Humphreys, in his judgment, quashed the planning permission and described the board. The board did an inspector, did a report on it, and it was about this net issue, which was this heritage building that was beside it. Now, apparently the inspector said, well, actually, once upon a time it was a heritage building, but it's not anymore. And they rightly pointed out in the board, well, it's actually not listed in some of the listed buildings by Cork County Council, who also were opposing the project.
Sorry, so it's not a listed building, but it's a heritage building. Yeah, and what legal standing does a heritage building have if it's not a listed building? And what heritage, anyway? Surely
this is called Highlands House.
Yeah, but surely a building has to have function, and the land around it has to have function as well.
So the board defended its decision on the basis that the best interpretation of the wording, intention and purpose of the county development plan was that should means you don't have to do it, and the word assess means to assess after the decision. Now, this is an 1840s, I would say, ruin, but other people might say a heritage building. It was not listed by the council in the record of protected structures in the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, right? And so anyway, the judge has decided to just simply say, no. Heritage is much more important. The procedures of which he actually accused the inspector of being conveniently Jesuitical. This is good coming from a course that turned down Clonliffe College. And then last Friday, I watched the 9 o'clock news. And so you have Micheál Martin, James Brown outside Arklow. This was one of the ones in 2018, the same time. This is a sewage treatment plant, a state-of-the-art one, which is actually being built and completed. They applied for that the same month as they applied for Clonshock. And you know what the bold Micheál said to the journalist? He said, I don't believe it's appropriate for judges to be deciding planning matters. Okay? Well, what the heck are you doing about it if you actually believe that? You are running the country. So my point is this, he's absolutely right in that. But so this is just the latest atrocity.
Hold on a second. Hold on now. Doesn't Humphreys and other judges, isn't their job to uphold the law? They can't actually, if they'd come to a legal decision based on legal statutes and precedent, don't they actually have to abide by that rather than deciding I'm going to ignore the law because there's a bigger societal need for the building of houses?
Please, Matt, please. So this comes down to a judicial interpretation of words that are written down in law.
That's what judges do. They make a judicial interpretation.
So the word should and the word assess being the words in question here. And you know what? I could go down to Paddy Murphy's pub and get an opinion on that. The truth is, we pay town planners, we pay people who have degrees in architecture to decide on these matters. But absolutely, you have a competing set of priorities. And the question is, what's more important? Because you could actually make it a condition of planning permission to retain certain artefacts or whatever. So there's a lot of ways of skinning this cat. But the situation, as we've highlighted somewhere, and this is just the latest, here you have 112 units that'll probably never see the light of day because they're no longer viable and so on. And for what? I'll tell you for what. There's about 5 million of legal fees. The county council represented. Bord Pleanála are spending over 10 million a year in paying legal fees. You have then the complainants' legal fees. You have Rudden's legal fees. This is an outrageous gravy train. The people who are graining this are the senior council and the junior council and the law library, and it needs to be called out for the racket that it is.
I hope you got your planning permission for your development down East Cork.
We did.
Because you wouldn't want to be saying that if you were in the middle of a legal process, would you?
But put it like this: this is symptomatic of what I really want.
Well, sorry, Ivan. Ian Guider has been superb in following the housing start figures and the housing completion, and again we saw more details this week about how Darragh O'Brien didn't give his cabinet colleagues full information as to what would really be built during 2024 and how that influenced them in their election promises and statements and all the rest of it. But Ian had been very much pointing out last year regularly that, if we got to 30,000, we'd be doing well. And we just got marginally over 30,000 completions last year. He follows the starts. And okay, last year's starts were accelerated by people trying to get things started before various tax arrangements ran out.
You have to apply for a commencement order.
Yeah. The amount of commencements in the first 4 months of the year is just over 4,000 new units.
This year.
Yeah. It's a scandal.
It's falling off a cliff.
It's falling off a cliff. This is, we literally, things are coming to a halt. And this is at a time when there's a desperate need for new accommodation, where young people are getting screwed because of high rents, because of the lack of accommodation, and don't have the opportunity to buy and are becoming increasingly detached.
Do you see the stories
and
about student accommodation and some of the costs? Unbelievable
They're
costs.
Extraordinary. It's extortionate.
They're now saying for your 900 a month, students who have no money, that'll only be for 5 days a week in Galway. So there's many manifestations of this. So I actually picked up the phone. So Matt sends me the usual 70-page stuff, which I appreciate and I read. And then he says, it's a dreadfully quiet week. So I worked the phones yesterday. I said, I better find out something that's not in the papers. And so the situation is now 6 months since the election, and people talk about 100 days.
God, 6 months.
Yeah. For both Trump and for Ireland.
Well done. We've managed to get 29 minutes in before we mentioned Trump.
Well, that's okay, because we'll talk about him in the second episode, because some of the things are going quite well for him actually at the moment. But anyway, we leave that aside.
You mean taking $400 million jets?
Yeah.
That's going well for him.
Someone's going to pay for it. Why not?
God!
We should have the same attitude.
Ethics and morality. Well, sorry, we'll get into this in the thing.
Okay, we will.
Because Charlie Haughey took gifts from Saudi Arabia 40 years ago.
But this is for the state, it's not for his personal.
Oh, he took it for personal, Charlie Haughey.
I thought it was Air Force One.
Sorry, that's for Trump. I'm talking about what Charlie Haughey took for himself. We'll get into that.
Anyway, so I rang around and I said, just tell me, look, I said, I'm banging on about this. I'm speaking to developers. They're pulling their hair out. They all supported either Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. They're utterly disillusioned. What is the truth about the effectiveness of this government? Well, did I get bowled over? So these are people who aren't on the payroll of the government, but this time last year were doing everything to support Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil behind the scenes to get re-elected. And they would have, if you cut them, they bleed in support of this. So for them to be given
green or blue, is it?
Yes, exactly. But for them to be given out about the government would actually mean that they wasted their own time and effort. So they said, first of all, the first big problem is Simon Harris. And I said, what's the problem with Simon Harris? Complete lack of focus, distracted. And that's okay when you're Taoiseach, but it's not okay when you're Taoiseach, hasn't settled into the role. When it comes to Fine Gael and housing, and if you actually listen to Harris did a big interview with the Irish Times on their podcast, he said basically two things. He said, we've given the exemption for the log cabins in your back garden, and we've changed the Airbnb. Get a grip.
Oh my God,
Get a
that's
grip.
all.
No, sir, it's less than 5,000 units each. And in fairness, I would say to John Cummins, well done as junior minister in those things. You've actually one of the junior ministers who's made some impact.
Sorry, has the log cabin thing even come in? I thought they just floated it as an idea.
No. That, well, put it like it's been announced. I don't know.
No, it's been announced as an idea. Like so many things are announced.
Okay, well, put it like this, that's even worse then. But look, the point is this, what the lectures I got about, look, all the people concerned about Gaza are going to vote for the Shinners anyway. There isn't one vote in all of that good stuff. But anyway, The relationship apparently between Harris and Micheál is not great. There is a distrust developing within the cabinet about leaking. There's a complete lack of collegiality, which is actually leading, and this is what happened with the Zara case, it's actually leading to an incoherent government. And actually Micheál needs to stop running around like a blue arse fly and actually start listening to people and starting to take a grip, because if he doesn't get a new narrative in place by September, this government is goosed. And like all that's been fed into Micheál's going at half-time anyway.
Is he?
Sorry.
I don't. Sorry. How long have I been telling you that I do not believe that Micheál Martin has any intention of giving up the leadership of Fianna Fáil? That I'm convinced that he put Jack Chambers in as his deputy, effectively making a feint as if he was going to sort out the future, but knowing that Jack Chambers doesn't have the charisma and doesn't display the charisma to lead the party.
And Darragh O'Brien's disappeared. I don't know where he's gone, but he seems to have disappeared.
He comes out every now and again. In fact, he had a go last week at people in East Cork, the part of the world that you're now so interested in, objecting to solar energy, which is another thing we get the objections to. I mean, there's great potential in solar energy, and farmers in East Cork, led by Fianna Fáil's young TD down there, what's his name? James O'Connor. He's been sort of banging the drum on that, and he was effectively put down by Darragh O'Brien. But look, Darragh O'Brien...
He's chairman of the infrastructure committee.
Yeah, but Darragh O'Brien is little... I still think his chances of becoming leader of Fianna Fáil, his goose has been cooked by his failure in relation to housing. And the other thing I want to come back, and I said it before and I'm going to repeat it again, is that be careful what you wish for. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were happy to get rid of the Greens, a few more extra seats at the cabinet table that they didn't have to give away. But what happened in the last government was that the three leaders arrangement meant that there was much easier to reach compromise, that you found a 2 against 1 instead of the 1 against 1 that you have at the moment.
Us,
They are missing Eamon Ryan's presence.
So, but I actually, as is my wont, I said to people, what do you think they should be doing that they're not doing? Leaving aside the general distraction and the lack of focus. You know, they say their number one priority is housing, but they're not behaving like that, and they're not listening to people. Someone said to me, and he's someone who's got vast experience of government, he said, actually, the times in Ireland when we most got things done, we had 2 Secretary Generals in the Department of the Taoiseach. So you would have had people whereby you would have had Pádraig O'Higgins or Paddy Tehan as an enforcer, but you would have a cabinet office person in tandem with them, Dermot Nally and Frank Murray, respectively. And that these 2 positions, one was to look after the cabinet government business, and the other was to go around to Secretary Generals and go around, Minister, and say, actually, you're going to build a financial services centre, you're going to make this happen and that. An enforcer with all the authority of the Taoiseach. So these were merged when Dermot McCarthy didn't get on with his sidekick. It was merged into one position. And Martin Fraser, actually in Enda Kenny's time, had the capacity to actually get things done, to ring up a SecGen or a minister and bawl them off, why haven't you done this, and so on. So what I was told was that John Callan does the cabinet office side of it. And UK governments have been really good at this, creating a cabinet office, which means these are the people who are responsible to enforce things. And so that was one suggestion that was sent to me. What do you think of that? Because there was a couple of suggestions on housing.
I mean, because certainly, I mean, the criticism that I think the government is definitely, and the previous government are definitely most prone to, is that it's all sort of sound bites about, yes, we understand the problem and we're putting together a plan to deal with this. And then we have a plan. Implementation then becomes the issue. And you look at all the things that we're failing to build or we're taking so long to build, key crucial infrastructure, failing to deal with the planning situation to get around the place, always putting things on the long finger. How did we get anything done before? And some people are going back now 100 years and pointing out the length of time between the idea for Ardnach Russia came up and its actual
and the national railways built in 3 years.
Yeah, you could even say if you go back to the late 80s, early 1990s.
But they didn't have the benefit of Richard Humphreys on the planning court.
And for the late 80s and the early 1990s, the construction of the start of the motorway network and then continuing that through into the... I mean, my God, if you can get the roads built, how can you not get other things built as well?
So 3 ideas. I was told practical things to solve the housing thing because they need something substantive, not a report which is not a result. The first thing is a 2-year VAT holiday on apartments. The apartments that start now and are completed within a certain period, the 13.5% VAT, just to give a holiday on that, to get all these ones. Secondly, grandfathering rights. The planning permission has run out on some of these. All planning decisions for 5 years should be extended to 10 years. That can be done by law. To reintroduce build to rent, which would actually allow you to have studio apartments. And the third big one is to simply say, you know what, if you build a house from the 1st of August, you will not be subject to rent regulation, rent pressure zones, and all new property. That will...
Politically, the rent pressure zones, is this
for new tenants? This is the choice between having a roof over your head or not.
Okay, but the rent pressure zones, this goes back to a comment you made there a minute ago, that if the government people are saying there's no votes for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in Gaza, for example, despite the fact that the government has been exceptionally strong in condemnation of what's happening to the Palestinian people, the right for Palestine, condemning Israel, correctly condemning Israel for what it does, is there any benefit to it in doing that? All the benefit accrues to the parties of the left. So could the same be said for in relation to the rent pressure zones, that the people who most want the main pressure zones maintained are the parties of the left, that something has to be done? So Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael need to be brave enough to make necessary adjustments.
You've just put your finger on, not brave enough. And we'll come on to Dennis O'Brien and working from home. But what's really disappointing people, and people who want this government to succeed, they've actually come to the conclusion that Martin and Harris are actually weak, not brave enough. The word you put there, that actually they are not either within the permanent government, within the cabinet, they are actually not exerting their authority. And you know the oldest rule in politics about power? If you don't use it, you lose it. And the truth of the matter is that actually, these are very good politicians. They're very good in elections. They're very good at political skills at keeping things, but they're actually very bad at governing. They're not making decisions. You
see, this is also one of the reasons why I think Micheál Martin is not planning on stepping down as leader of Fianna Fáil when he finishes his term as Taoiseach. Now, the Parliamentary Party might have a different view on things at that stage. They might think that he's there long enough.
He's 1 year younger than me. He'll be 65 in August. I'll be 66.
He's a lot more energy than you have, though.
Oh, absolutely. He actually shocks me with his early morning swimming, and he's here and he's there and he's everywhere. And good luck to him, and I admire that. But the fact of the matter is, you know, you can be a busy fool too.
Well, he's there since 2011 as leader at this stage.
Longest serving?
14 years.
Dev.
14 years as leader of Fianna Fáil. He lives and breathes politics. If he was going and if he wanted to leave a legacy, I think he would be brave and he would do the things that need to be done in housing. But if he is thinking about the next election and leading them into the next election, maybe that is why that maybe makes him a little bit more reticent, that he's afraid of doing things now that would make him unpopular, which is silly because they are going to get killed in the next election if they haven't made a reasonable fist of sorting out the housing crisis. And for all the things, he can go to and maybe debates in 2029 and say, look what we did when we were stood up on behalf of the people of Gaza, and it won't matter a damn to him. Although, just as an aside, do you think maybe they'll start painting their fingernails in the colours of the Palestinian flag?
Why do you say that?
You know, Sinead Gibney of the Social Democrats? I mean, she was last week.
Well, she was shafted out of Foreign Affairs. What was behind that?
People are wondering, is it to do with, she was did a press conference last week, which turned out to be her major last press conference on the plinth in her role. And she was talking about standing up for Gaza and the rest of it and making sacrifices. And then
so green, red and black was
she continued to have her fingernails and she got derided on social media
See,
and in
there's
the
a
media
classic
for that.
example. Mother of Two and Tala, or the pubs that they wouldn't even know that story. But when you're in the media bubble, you know, and actually it's a relevant story. It is. Because why would they sack her? Oh, she's had three other portfolios.
I'm not saying that
but she was shafted out of it. Like, she was only recently appointed Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, they've done a reshuffle. So she also said
like they are starting to behave. It's student politics.
No, hold on. Let me finish. And we can't say for definite that her fingernails were the reason that she was moved out of that position.
Don't kill a good story, Matt. Don't let the truth get in the way of a spicy story.
We're hanging on by our own fingernails to this thing. But anyway, okay. So she also said in the course of that interview, she was asked about what was happening between India and Pakistan. And she said she wasn't really across it, but they'd keep an eye on it. And I think maybe Cian O'Callaghan is a tougher nut, perhaps, than people might give him credit for. Still the acting leader of the Social Democrats, and he has moved her to a new position this week. So that's as an aside. Okay. But I suppose going back to the key thing is, if Micheál Martin gets up and says, we stood up for the people of Gaza, you're right, that ain't going to win votes.
So there was just a couple other little housing-related tidbits that I picked up. One was, and I didn't know this, that 144 civil servants left the Department of Housing to go and join DEC. The way to fast track the Department of Environment and Climate Change. This is under Eamon Ryan's time. They increased that department very rapidly. And I'm only passing on what people said to me, that Department of Housing at a lower level has been hollowed out, and that is causing problems in its own right. A couple of interesting things. Jack Chambers has said at conferences, only this week, not one as I was at, saying that I am going to make this pillar within my Department of Infrastructure work. He's appointed Sean O'Driscoll, and he's appointed Fergal O'Rourke. Sean is
formerly of Glendon.
Yes. And Fergal O'Rourke, formerly
PwC, managed by, and the chair of the IDA, and son of Mary O'Rourke.
And what they're going to focus on is actually the long-term infrastructural projects to develop tracts of land. The Special Activation Housing Office, which James Brown is going to continue with, even though it's actually quite complicated. It's a silo outside of the department, and basically their job is to get actual sites and projects that they are going to move on right now, that are shovel ready, get planning and get infrastructure into. So this is the theory. Everybody.
Theory. This government is full of theory. It's full of plans. Where's the practice?
Everybody, and I say this with regret, that everybody from a height is urinating on James Brown. Like he reminds me of all the Owen Murphy things. The one thing everyone agrees is, after the botched housing czar, he's to blame, which is facile and unfair.
You know, there was this story that he was the accidental minister because that he wasn't meant to be, and something happened, that there was a very last minute reshuffle.
Well, apparently,
he's certainly putting the accident into accidental, isn't he?
I inquired about that.
Yeah.
And I was told that the biggest problem he had was who would take over as a heavyweight from Eamon Ryan. And to me, it was a no-brainer. It was James Lawless. And apparently, whatever happened, Dara ended up in that job. And maybe
they had to get him out of housing.
Yeah, maybe the plan was that Dara was going to stay in. But like the Taoiseach, that would be close in. And, you know, he has a very tight circle of two people when you come to that. Deirdre and Sean and a few of those people, Pat. So good luck with all that. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that a couple of other little gossipy bits, you know, when you're talking about people, in terms of the triple lock, that Labour are moving away from that consensus between Soc Dems and Sinn Féin. Apparently the full-blooded opposition to the triple lock. Just keep an eye on Ivana Becic. The other thing is...
and we might discuss that a little bit more in the subscription edition. There was a very good piece by Shane Coleman in the Business Post about that last week as well. And it is something we've spoken about, that the triple lock is not... part of our neutrality.
He actually came up with a great saying. He talked about this Trojan horse strategy, that what the opposition are doing really well is catastrophizing suggestions to make it sound, we're all going to be marshalled into...
Do you want your children and your grandchildren out fighting wars?
Just on the Goss side, on the presidency, the latest instalment, very interesting column last Saturday in the Daily Mail that Joe Duffy would make a great president.
Inspired by you in this podcast last week.
I chuckled heartily, but not as heartily as some of the people who text me about it. But just to say...
I did say that I wasn't endorsing him for president.
You said he was kind and sympathetic and ideal in every respect.
He's been nice to you.
No, so just to say some new news on the presidency. 2 people have put up their hand as saying they're interested. One is our old friend, the former Concola, Sean O'Farrell, has said that he has the perfect CV. He's kind of non-political and political, and he is interested in it.
No chance.
Okay.
No chance.
The other one Sean, on the left. Okay, well, it's not like
seriously.
It's not like you to get off the fence. But,
sorry. Does he have a profile? Do people in politics think that being the Ceann Comhairle gives you a profile that would appeal to the national electorate?
He reformed the Dáil and he did lots of good things.
Oh, that'll get people running out to vote for him.
He dined for Ireland, in fairness.
Yeah.
Brendan Howlin is the other one. That's the other name that was put on me this new. There are really divided views about Bertie. I have said this won't be happening, but Bertie is keeping the fire lit in relation to that. Joe Duffy got a negative feedback from my political people saying, is there anyone in Ireland with a bigger ego? That was the question that I was asked. And I said, I don't know. I did. No, sorry. You know what they all said to me?
Is that pots and kettles?
We'll tell you what I really learned, right? And I got detailed texts about this. I said to you that Fianna Fáil took the view that September be time enough to put in a candidate.
No, it's not.
No, that's what they said, right? And whether that's right or wrong. This has greatly affected. So the primary decision about a candidate of the left is Sinn Féin can nominate their own candidate. They have put it back into June, a Sinn Féin decision at the earliest. There's a general feeling amongst all parties that the endless silly season scrutiny of any candidate. Things will come up about their siblings, about things when they did at school, and things that they thought they'd forgotten themselves, that no one will survive that scrutiny, and it'll end in heartache, and therefore the shorter the run-in and the busier the news octave, the better the chance. So now the consensus is, both with the candidate of the left. Everyone is saying to me in Fine Gael, Mairead McGuinness this morning is doing a fundraiser for Barry Ward in Dunleary. She's maybe out on the beat again. I maybe got a false read that she wasn't interested. But the situation is, if she is the Fine Gael candidate, what will Fianna Fáil do? And they will find it very difficult to resist the opportunity of either not supporting a celebrity who's quasi-Fianna Fáil and independent, or like Mary McAleese or whatever.
Michael McDougall. Mary McAleese launched his book for him last week.
I was told reliably by someone who was at that book launch and would be his closest supporter, it ain't happening. The thoughts of it and the presentation of it and us talking about it, fine and dandy. He ain't doing it. Put it like this. This person would be the person who would actually go organise the campaign. You know who you are. Basically, he said, there's nothing happening.
We will leave it at that. We have lots to get through. Ivan teased the possibility, talking about Dennis O'Brien wanting you to go back into your office or into your workplace instead of working from home.
Don't get me started.
Well, I will. I'll be getting you started during the subscription edition.
And poor Paddy O'Toole passed away. I want to talk about him.
I didn't know him, but I presume you know him because he was a minister in the 1980s, wasn't he?
And what is Trump doing? He's done a deal with China. He's trying to get peace in Ukraine.
That's not a deal with China.
He's had a blitzkrieg of a success of a Gulf tour. We'll have to talk about Trump, Peter.
God, you fall for the Trump propaganda so readily. We'll get to all of that in the subscription
I know the buttons
edition.
to press.
PatToPowerPodcast.com is where you can get details of how to subscribe. Although if you're on Apple, Spotify or any of those platforms, then there will be the option there to subscribe to the bonus edition as well. And if you want to get in touch with us, unfortunately I didn't get time to look this week. I promise I will for next week. I'll look at all the mail at PatToPowerPodcast.com.
You know what my biggest problem is? Having discussed what we discussed this week, I've got to go to a big conference in the Europe Hotel in Killarney, and who's going to be there? Only Simon and Micheál. How am I going to face them?
I don't think it'll be any bother to the size of your neck. I don't think it'll be any bother to you. Until the next time, from me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you for joining us.